The Underwater Realm is a project that is insanely ambitious and probably shouldn't be possible for a small independent film company, except for the fact that the people behind the making of it are equally as insane and ambitious, as well as being ridiculously driven.
It demands absolutely every single part of you. It demands every single bit of energy you can give it. Everything has been focused on getting these films made, on getting these stories told, and everyone has had that same attitude.
At the Underwater Realm, it's just one of those things that everyone has just come and started off at just for a little bit, and then you just want to stay and you want to do more and you want to stay with those people more and you want to see what happens. And because people care about it so much, they put in even more, pushing themselves much further than they ever thought they would be able to.
You put your heart and soul into it. You put everything that you want from the film, you bring from yourself, not only financially, because mostly it doesn't have any budget or no low budget at all, but you put your heart and soul, and you bring the people around you that can make it happen. And so that's what Dave's been able to do, you know, with the whole ethos of Realm Pictures.
So the whole idea behind the Underwater Realm, the whole genesis of the project is really, it's kind of what's echoed throughout the making of it. It's that it's taking on something that's just way more than you should be able to achieve, which is what we've tried to instill in everybody that's worked on it. I was in a script development meeting with Rosie and John, and Zombies was over. We decided, you know, we needed to take on the next big project. The one thing about Zombies that it just wasn't very Realm. We're called Realm Pictures because it invokes this kind of misty, mythological, historical British storytelling, and Zombies wasn't that at all. It was a hell of a lot of fun, but it wasn't Realm. We needed something that was more in line with our kind of ethos, our belief. And as an example of how open I wanted the discussion to be, I didn't want there to be any rules at all. I wanted it to literally just be, you come up with anything. And as an example, the first thing that popped into my head is it just kind of floated on in there. Let's set the whole thing underwater, you know, like anything goes. And we then continued to have this meeting, not taking the idea seriously. And every now and then, Rosie and John would look over and I'd just be kind of staring off into space. And what I was seeing was this poster. I was seeing this kind of underwater mountain with a hero on top of the mountain reaching up and touching the nose of a humpback whale, like an underwater dragon. And they kept saying, "Oh, what are you thinking?" I'm like, "I'm still stuck with that underwater idea." And they would laugh and kind of, we'd move on. And this kept happening. And sometimes when an idea like that lodges in your head, it gets stuck. It's like a splinter in the back of your mind. And it just never went away, and still hasn't. I don't think it ever will. It's 2/3 of our planet. It's this phenomenal, alien and yet completely natural world, and that's where the stories belong. So the one problem with setting an entire series of films underwater was kind of the whole point of coming up with the idea, was it was ridiculous. It just couldn't be done. It had never been done, and that's its greatest strength, but also its greatest weakness, or our greatest challenge, I should say. How the hell do you do it? How do you do what nobody's ever done? How do you get underwater and tell a convincing story? Not just manage to make some pictures underwater, some, you know, pretty documentary images. How do you really bring drama and story under the surface of the water? We had no idea how we were actually going to move it forwards and start a production happening, until one day a competition popped up that was being run by Raindance Film Festival. But the pitch was to create a 2-minute film that explained or documented how you and your friends took it to the max. And I think to a lot of people, that kind of means, okay, max, maximum, extreme, kind of extreme sports, all that kind of stuff. But to us, max really means one thing, and it's what's written at the bottom of the credit card statement that comes through at the end of a month, especially when you've been filmmaking. I think a lot of filmmakers out there will relate to that. And so we decided that we were going to make a 2-minute love letter to the art of independent filmmaking. which is about having no money but having great friends with you and having a common goal. And we made a very, very honest piece that ended up winning the competition, and that then came with a big old chunk of prize money, which we kind of sat down and we scratched our heads and went, okay, this is the beginning of the Underwater Realm. This is how we get started. We spent the first 6 months trying to develop a technique called dry for wet, which has been used frequently for a couple of effect shots, but never to tell an entire story. We were trying to take a man and fly him through the air and make it look as if he was swimming through the ocean. We had some phenomenal people even at that level getting on board. We had a shoot that was complimentary at Shepperton Studios. We had one of the best wire work teams in the world come along and help us fly this man through the air, but it just fundamentally wasn't going to work. It was just, physics were too great, the disparity between the ease of motion underwater and the difficulty of moving around while you're strapped to wires hanging from the ceiling. And we had our first foray into underwater photography as well. We weren't ever planning to do the whole thing on a dry for wet stage. We were also shooting in quarries and out in the open ocean, but we had utterly, utterly underestimated the force of nature herself, the temperature of the water, the endurance of the talent that we were having to put into the water and the situation that we were putting them in. Even things as simple as the manufacture of costume, hair and makeup, props that would survive a shoot like that. And then on top of that, you've got all the stuff like weather, sunlight, just absolute nightmare. And so by the end of that first year, we were running low on budget. We hadn't really got anything good to show for it. And we didn't really know what to do. We couldn't stop. One of the greatest threads of this project has been the weekly video blog. We'd been saying to people from the beginning, we will do this. Every week we invited them into our home and we said, we are doing this, we will continue doing this. And I think without that, there could have been points where we would have failed, we would have quit. But by bringing those people in and having a responsibility to keep delivering to them the story of the making of the story, we kept going, we had to. And we realized at the end of that first year, when we were running out of money, we were running out of hope, we were running out of drive, and certainly not getting fantastic results, that the strongest asset of the project were the people that were inspired by it. So we thought, well, what if we can open it up? What if we can get a bigger audience? What if we can generate some real power from the community that wants to see these films, the people that we're making the films for? And that's when we became aware of crowdfunding, and specifically Kickstarter. Kickstarter is an all or nothing funding platform, so we had to nominate an amount of money and an amount of time that we were going to give ourselves to raise that money. And if we were only $1 off, we got nothing. All or nothing. And that suited us right down to the ground, because it's the sort of people we are, it's the sort of project that it is. It's not about taking the easy option and the safe option. It's about doing the unachievable, the unattainable, and making it possible. So now with this amazing crowdfunding campaign, this huge momentum, we had no pre-existing audience, we had nobody of any special renown attached to the project, and yet suddenly it took off, and it really snowballed and exceeded our wildest dreams. We now had the power to make the project. It was an incredibly exciting time. We knew we had this massive extended audience, we had all this momentum behind us, and we had some great stuff to move forward with immediately. So we really leapt on board with pre-production and then production itself.
So the crazy thing about principal photography on the Underwater Realm is that we didn't start in the water. We started with the galleon. We were coming up with ideas. We had many hours of production meetings coming up with an idea of how we could build this galleon, because we wanted to be able to have the cross-section of the gun deck of a Spanish galleon.
Originally, I assumed it was going to be a lot smaller than it was. And then Dave went, no, it's going to be 10 meters long. We're going to need about 20 people on it, and it's got to move. Absolutely no Star Trekking. I still look at the footage, like throughout post-production, catching glimpses of anybody working on 1588 and just thinking, we made that. And to this day, I think that was my favourite reduction to date. That was just so much fun to do.
The hours were absolutely grueling. I mean, I remember every morning waking up basically in the same clothes, getting up, working for 16, 17 hours, getting up and doing it again. And we didn't stop for basically the 2 months I was here. We didn't have any days off. But it was, I say it to anyone who I ever talk to about the project, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but by far the most rewarding.
Next door to that we had the Spitfire being built in the trough of sandbags to flood it up and drain it out and flood it again and set it on fire and do all these wonderful things. And there's nothing better than making your own giant airfix model.
Knowing that we had a very, very tight budget, Mark and I essentially spent 2 months in the garage in what I can only describe as extreme Blue Peter. We managed to get something built on a very, very low budget, and I think we were all so proud of how it looked.
But always in the back of our mind, we knew that although this was appearing to be an incredibly challenging, incredibly taxing shoot, that we were having to be innovative at every turn, we always knew that the biggest challenge was yet to come. We always knew that people had done this before, and we could learn from that. But what came next, there was no rule book. We had to write one. And then came the underwater shoots. So the number one thing that we'd learned from our now 18 months working on the project was that you can't let any variable become out of your control. And that meant no shooting in the sea, no shooting in quarries. We had to shoot in a controlled environment and make it look like an uncontrolled environment. So the first thing is finding this location. Where can you shoot? You can't just go to your local swimming pool. It's only 2 meters deep. You'd see the surface. There's no conceivable way it would work. And this was the headspace we were in. We were so energized by all this big budget kind of Kickstarter and the beginnings of this huge fan base that we thought, well, we've got to do it the pro way. We've got to approach a big studio. There's a studio in the UK that has arguably the best underwater filming stage in the world, and we reached out to them. They were actually very cooperative, and we got it into our heads we were going to shoot our picture there. We were the underwater realm. We've got this great budget, great audience. We're going to go there and we're going to shoot our picture the way the pros would do it. And we pursued that for months and months. And it turned out after a while that relationship, it just wasn't going to go anywhere. We couldn't compete with the likes of the big summer blockbusters that were also wanting to use it. And in the end, we had to draw a line under that and say, we need to figure something else out. And rather than learn the lesson there, we actually tried again with a different studio, a different space that we actually had booked and pursued chasing dates down and all the rest of it. And again, at the last minute, once we'd had our actors scheduled in, once we'd had our costumes, our props, everything built and ready to go, everybody booked the time off work because we're all working 9-to-5 jobs at the same time. And 2 weeks before, we find out that actually it wasn't booked. It was kind of a wish of the person we were dealing with. And we were down in the dumps. And it was a very depressing time. It was a very, very difficult time. In the end, we looked at the stuff that we'd got, and it was great. And we talked about how we could look at alternatives. We started frantically looking for other options. And we realized after a while that maybe the problem was that we were trying to play the big boys game. We were trying to be a very small fish in a very big pond, if you'll excuse the watery reference. And that actually the way to solve this problem was always to look at what our strengths were and to see if there was an option there. And our strengths, from way back, indie filmmaking. It's about thinking outside the box. It's about being innovative. It's about taking on challenges, not in the way that it's always been done, not in the way that kind of the industry has established it should be done or it has to be done. Coming up with fundamentally, what do we need to get through the lens of that camera? And we went right back to the pool that we first learned to scuba dive in, the little 4-meter pool at the local dive retailer who'd let us in and let us use their scuba kit so that we could learn what it was about, what all this scuba diving malarkey was about. And we went back there and I thought, well, we've always ruled it out. And we've always said, well, you can't put a green screen in here, you can't haze it, it's not big enough, we need bigger and we need better. And actually, what we needed was an illusion. We needed to stop thinking about what we couldn't do and start thinking about what we could. And so we started coming up with matte paintings. We started working with a local artist, a guy called Scott Gleed, who was building synthetic seaweed that was incredibly realistic, using clouding agent in the water, using certain lighting techniques. And suddenly, we turned this small pool into a corner of a much greater ocean. And that indie filmmaking resourcefulness, that indie filmmaking vibe, is exactly what then spurred us on and gave us the kick up the arse we needed to really start thinking about new ways of tackling these problems.
So we were lucky enough to be able to connect with the guys at Leisure at Cheltenham. We went up to be able to visit. They had a separate dive pool as well as their main pool where they still had lessons and everything going on. And they were so accommodating.
They stepped back and gave us the room to be creative that we needed. We were filling their pool with a massive canvas sheet that was covered in sand. We were putting fiberglass rocks that were covered in concrete in there. We were pouring clouding agent into the water to make it look more like the bottom of the sea. And they just stood back and said, whatever you need to do, guys, it's yours. Like, make the film. It needs to be done.
We couldn't have asked for nicer people. Anything that we needed, they were willing to accommodate us. They rescheduled weeks of different clubs and groups, and just went, right, let's get this made. And everyone from the managers to the lifeguards to the cleaners were just so excited to be part of something like this.
So in order to develop this underwater filmmaking technique, we had dozens of challenges. How do we focus a camera underwater? We had to develop a system working with engineers to make that work. Lighting underwater, we had to develop our own underwater LED lights for the project. Our actors can't hear us, our crew can't hear us underwater. We had to develop an underwater communication system to make that work. And we were ticking these problems off one at a time in the most resourceful and indie way we could, building an underwater set, all this stuff. But one of the biggest challenges was the people that we had to throw in to the water and you know, ask them to perform and to actually deliver our story. The challenge there is that those people are dealing with a level of endurance that is unknown of on most film sets. They're having to constantly support their own weight in the water. They're having to hold their breath while they're doing a scene. They're having to open their eyes in a chlorinated pool and have it not just look natural, but actually be able to interact with people they can't really see. And the only sense that's really working is the fact that they can now hear. They can hear the music and they can hear my voice, and I can cue them through the scene. But that really started to take its toll. And the one thing that amazes me about this project is that on every step of the way, one tiny thing could have ruined the whole lot. And so are we just rolling a dice again and again and again and happening to be lucky? Or is it just the nature of the project that we will always roll a 6? There was a day at the end of the 149 shoot, we'd done 10 days straight shooting underwater, doing impossibly long days, getting into the pool at 6 a.m, leaving at 10 p.m, back in at 6 a.m, 10 days straight, and we were getting to I think we were the penultimate day of the shoot, and we still weren't done. We had 4 days to shoot 4 minutes worth of film with 6 people in the water at the same time. Incredible challenge. And in the penultimate day, we could get it done with 1 day to go, but we'd pushed our actors too far.
Our cast had been in and out of the water solidly for about 5 days, and they were tired. They were still going, they weren't complaining at all, they were still soldiering on, but you could tell they were tired, and by this point the chlorine levels in the pool were really, really starting to get to them.
There was too much time spent near the surface of the water where the chlorine gas forms with the interaction between the water and the atmosphere. And it was burning the actors' eyes, it was giving them real discomfort, to the point where they weren't able to get into the water. And so even at this stage, even after the first year, after Kickstarter, after the Galleon shoot, after the Spitfire shoot, after all the experiences that we'd had and all the drive of the project, 1 day left to go could topple the whole thing.
Me and Dave are looking through this previs and the rough assembly that we did on set, and we're like, if we can't get them back in the water tomorrow, and we don't get these shots, then this film's not going to happen.
And we were so close to finishing, but also so very far, because we didn't know if we were actually going to be able to finish these films.
If our lead actors couldn't get in the water to finish the story, we didn't have a part 5, and if we didn't have a part 5, then everything's leading up. It's like not having an ending to your movie, because this is a series of 5. It culminates in part 5. And that one day, if she couldn't have got in the water that day, because she was in real pain, this is Amanda, the lead for 149, if she couldn't have got in the water, we didn't have any money left to do a reshoot, we didn't have any time left to do a reshoot. The whole thing could have come crumbling down. But it didn't. And that's one example of dozens of examples where, through people's guts, determination, bravery, and through other people just appearing like a fairy godmother and being inspired by the project. We had a lifeguard, a guy called Danny, didn't know him from Adam, but he'd always been fascinated by film. he stayed beyond his shifts to help us out. And when the chlorine started becoming a problem with the actor's eyes, he was always there on hand with saline solution, telling us exactly what order to rinse the eye, when we should do it, when we should rest them. Gave Amanda a lot of rest, and the rest of the actors a lot of rest on the day before the final shoot. And the next day, they were fine, and we got it all done.
Again, it came down to just that one extra person being inspired by the idea and the need to finish these films. It came down to that person getting involved. And I think that's really testament to how the whole project has worked.
I have no problem admitting that it was the hardest experience of my life. It was a grueling, wonderful experience.
It's honestly been one of the most stressful, hectic, frightening experiences of my life, but also one of the best, and I honestly wouldn't change anything for the world.
It was a privilege to be a part of this, and it's been really awesome, and I can't wait for the world to see it, because I think it's going to take the world by storm.
I think the fact that Underwater Realm's been so many people and been so hard, and people have poured so much into it, that's something that will stick people together forever, because as much as the Underwater Realm is a story about people under the sea, almost a bigger story are the people that made it, and that is just as big and will stay for just as long.
The most gratifying thing has not just been what we've achieved, but it's been who we've achieved it with, the people we've worked with. We did that. It happened, and we did it because we had a lot of fantastic people around us who shared that dream.
This didn't happen with studio backing. It didn't have any momentum or power behind it when it first started. It wasn't a script that got handed down from a studio exec or something that had been bounced around in a number of meetings and then eventually was the product of a vote. It was just an idea. It was just a singular moment in one person's brain that then grew and blossomed and inspired other people. And their ideas then contributed to it and increased its power and its energy to the point that it's now become this enormous thing that's deeply touched the lives of dozens of people and reached out to thousands, hopefully more, around the world as it's grown. And I think that's the real root of the story. That if you have an idea of anything in your life, that it is possible for a single idea, a single mind to just create. That's what creativity is about. That's what inspiration is about. That's what this project is about. Let's keep it going.